Hello, lovely listener, and welcome to the Aardvark Swift podcast. I'm James Bowers, and I'm part of the marketing team here at Aardvark Swift. Throughout this series, we'll be chatting to game studios, initiatives, and industry professionals about all things video games, from tips on how to get into this sector to studio cultures and projects to get involved in. This month, I'm speaking with George Osborn, Head of Communications for Ukie. We discuss the impact of COVID-19 on the industry as we move forward, ensuring smaller developers aren't left behind, and how he was once an answer on a BBC Two game show. Your role is Head of Communications. What does that involve?
Well, being Head of Communications, funnily enough, involves a lot of communication. It might seem straightforward, but actually it's a really interesting mix of a lot of different roles and disciplines kind of all merged into one. So, my job encompasses everything from going and speaking to the press. So that means dealing with inbound press inquiries and trying to pitch stories out to them. It means making sure that we're managing our communication with our members. So, Ukie has nearly 500 members of all different shapes and sizes. So it's important that we're speaking to all of those people. But it is also about keeping everything within Ukie communicating as well. We have lots of different teams working on everything ranging from political and public affairs all the way through to our education initiative, through to some of the great work that's done on the membership side as well. So it's really important that we're actually all talking to ourselves, actually make sure that we're staying on track. We're all following our strategy to try and make the UK the best place in the world to make, play and sell games. So it means that I have to talk to all of those groups and, make sure as well that we bring as many people with us too. So there are lots of people outside of Ukie itself, ranging from the members, but also people in places like political organisations, charities, other places who will come and speak to us about games. And it's my job to talk to them about the industry.
That makes sense. From the outside looking in, with the amount of initiatives you're involved in, with the amount of sort of support and outreach you provide to nationwide studios, you must be some of the busiest people in the world.
I think we are quite busy. I think that's fair to say. I mean, I've obviously been particularly paying attention to how much work has been done since the start of the lockdown phase, because, it's obviously been such a significant shift. And I think what's been really noticeable is about how the team's carried on. I think even the team might be doing even more than they normally do. So that's fantastic. It means that we're doing a lot for the industry, supporting lots of different causes. But, even internally, one of the things we always have to be really careful about is just making sure everyone's all right. It's very tempting to sit and do lots and lots of work and lots of activity at the moment when there hasn't been a huge amount else going on. Unfortunately, that's starting to change. So I think, we're facing the same challenges that lots and lots of businesses are, but trying to lead the way by, keeping ourselves going, but making sure that we're also looking after ourselves in the process.
Yeah, definitely. With there being no clear delineation between work and home life, your computer could be in bed or 2 paces away from bed. So yeah, I think it's definitely been a learning experience of people not overdoing it.
Well, exactly. And I mean, it sounds as if you've actually been installing a camera or having a look into where I work, because I definitely have been working in bed. I think that it's a really important point actually about that kind of delineation, because, in terms of my history, I used to be self-employed and I used to work remotely a lot. And even I found this really quite challenging, quite difficult. There's been a lot of people saying things like, some days it's been really hard. Some days I've really struggled to separate those two things out, that work-life balance. And, these are common challenges when you're working remotely, but I think this current situation really does exacerbate them. So, anyone who's listening, who's been thinking that, don't worry. That's a completely natural and normal thing to be thinking right now. And it's normal to find this hard. So just be reassured on that front and just keep plowing on where you can.
You just touched on it there slightly. I did want to have a look at your career history of how you got to the position you're at now. So you mentioned you worked a lot remotely. What does your sort of career path look like to get to Head of Communications?
Honestly, it's a complete and total mess, frankly, but in a kind of an entertaining way. So I came out of university and I went and started out in a sort of tech journalism internship. So I was up in Cambridge at the time, and obviously with Cambridge there's a lot in terms of the game scene. So I remember doing some interviews with some studios for this publication, and then a job came up at an advertising startup and they needed a copywriter, and the majority of their clients were games businesses because it was the early days of mobile advertising. So lots and lots of games companies were switching to free to play for the first time and putting a lot of advertising budget into doing so. So we were doing a lot of copy work for those kinds of businesses, and over the course of a couple of years, I started off in a junior position, became the head of content there, built up a lot of contacts with publications, advertising networks, games companies. So about age of 24, I founded my own business. And then basically for about 6 years, I ran that business. But the business, I mean, on the face of it, it was a content marketing agency, providing services to the games and advertising business. But realistically, it was a convenient wrapper to allow me to do just about anything I could get paid for. So it ranged from, yes, doing pretty run-of-the-mill but important content marketing for various different companies, but it also included working as a freelance journalist. So did work for The Guardian, Games Industry Biz, and then in terms of a stranger one, BT Sport as well, where I worked there as a scriptwriter for a bit. On top of that, I also organised some industry conferences, so a number of the Pocket Game Connects conferences in 2015 across the world, a couple of events, Mobile Games Forum and the Games Forum series. So I managed to get that into there as well. And then also picked up work doing things like presenting on stage, a little bit of work as an analyst, and I managed to find some time in between that as well to do a bit of political campaigning on behalf of a party and a pressure group I founded a couple of years ago. So to say it's a mixed bag, I think it's reasonable to say that it is a mixed bag. And I think it's also reasonable to say that to end up in this kind of position after that kind of career is not necessarily very easy to explain to someone. It's not going to be one of those things where there's a very clear progression. But what I think it shows is it shows what actually goes into a communication role. I think for me, I hope I got the role because I was able to show that I had done a wide variety of different activities that are relevant to the communications world. So I'd done my time in terms of journalism, so I understood what the press was looking for, organised a lot of events. A lot of the time you're organising events or activities as a way to communicate with people, running campaigns. Campaigns are obviously sort of a very key part as well of being a comms professional, whether it's launching a game or running initiatives. And I think that was really the key to it. Communications is an incredibly versatile discipline. You need to be good at lots and lots of different things. I mean, at the fundamental core of it, you need to be a great communicator. But if you can't practically apply that, you're going to find it harder to get onto the career ladder in the direction that you'd be wanting to go in, which is naturally upwards because it's a career ladder. This is how this works. But that's, I think, the point is communications isn't necessarily just one thing. It's this wide range of activities which you either need to get good at covering a good breadth of them, or you need to start specializing to be able to go and take one of them on board.
Yeah, no, I can definitely see the through lines of like marketing, events, journalism. It all does sort of culminate in what you're doing now. So although they might be disparate between themselves, they actually do come together as a whole. So yeah, I can see why head of communications would suit someone with that background, especially with a slight political lean as well.
That's good to hear. I'll make sure that I have this podcast cited in my next review.
Feel free.
Excellent. There we go. Top evidence for the MBOs, that one.
Yeah, that can be the pull quote. So if you weren't working in your current role, and it wouldn't have to actually be in video games, if you can think of something that you've got another interest in, I know you mentioned teaching guitar. If you weren't working in your current role, what do you think you'd be doing?
That's a good question. I think I would have veered off in one of two directions. I think I'd either be working in the football industry, writing, doing whatever I could in that industry to earn a crust, or I would be probably off into the world of politics, which are two quite divergent worlds, to say the least. When I think about what I really enjoy about the job, I mean, I really do enjoy the campaigning aspect, running activities that aren't just good ideas, but actually change the way people think or change the way that people behave. Those kinds of things that, I think they're really satisfying, especially because, in the current role with games, you can do so much that's positive. It's really nice to actually be involved in work with an organization where if we run a campaign, we can actually make a significant positive change to lots and lots of lives across the country. So that's fantastic. And so that's where the politics side would come from. And from the football side, I've had a long-standing, lifelong interest in football, as well as obviously having naturally watched every single football game possible since this restart started. I had a brief stint as the industry's football manager expert for a while. Right. And that led to me getting a job at BT Sport, or at least a contract there, doing script writing for a couple of seasons until I actually shifted into a full-time role. So I would love to have carried that on because, I'm really passionate about the game, to be totally honest with you. But it's also one of those situations where it's a bit like working in the games industry. It's incredible. Sometimes pinch myself when I'm on the phone to a company or a member or someone who's really, really senior in the industry and be like, I was playing your games when I was a child. Yeah. And now I'm talking to you about your latest super secret unreleased thing, and isn't this so exciting? I'm in that very envious position where it's a bit like there are other things that I would potentially like to do, but actually I'm in a bit of a dream job at the moment, so it's not too tempted to make a move yet, shall we say.
No, definitely. So we've kind of covered a little bit of what the role of head of communications encapsulates, but what does a typical day-to-day look like for you?
I think actually if you go to MCV, and I think there was an interview recently with Kat Channon, who does a very similar role for EA in terms of their European operations, and I think one of the things she said that was great about the job is that every day is different. You know, you wake up and I often just check my inbox being a bit like, so what's coming today? You do have your long-term plans. You do think carefully about what your organization is doing, what it's trying to achieve, who are you trying to communicate to, and you set plans as best as you can to deliver on those things. It's the reason why we've been able to do some really big campaigns like our Get Smart About Play consumer responsibility campaign, the Games for Carers initiative when the COVID stuff started. You know, those kinds of things happen because you have that long-term plan. But then there are also those days where everything falls apart and you have to go and run after things to try and pick it up. You know, there's a crisis brews and you have to go and deal with it. And then there's days where you get an email out of the blue, which someone says, oh, can you think about this? And it completely changes the way that you're thinking about your job or thinking about what you're working on, change your priorities, and something you're shuffling your calendar around to try and make everything work. So, you know, I think there isn't really too much of a typical day, but I think in terms of like what goes into a typical day, you know, there's a few common factors. You are going to spend a hell of a lot of your time in your inbox. Like, let's be honest, like if you're communicating, you've got to be a great writer. You are going to spend a lot of time meeting and calling people. If you don't like meeting and calling people, it's going to be hard as a head of communications because, you know, I mean, obviously at the moment it's slightly different due to the current rules and regulations. But, you know, I would look at my calendar and kind of be a bit disappointed if I wasn't speaking to someone different, you know, someone new, someone different every single day. So, you know, you've got to be willing to go out and do that. And then I think just in terms of the other things, there are some consistent things that pop up. You know, you've actually got to have quite a big love of an Excel spreadsheet. You know, that's actually sort of quite a common thing for a head of communications because you need to be able to get yourself a good overview. You're going to be in and out of PowerPoint decks all of the time. And as I say, the amount of time you're going to be sitting in front of a word processor or an email, just churning out copy, you're going to have to get used to that. But it's always fascinating because, you know, the challenge of speaking to a journalist about a particular issue and crafting a statement is going to be completely different to benchmarking whether or not the content on your website that you've just been posting is performing better or worse than other types of comparable content to try and drive your content strategy. So communications is really, really interesting because you get that breadth. And then later on in your career, if you want to, you can choose to go and specialize in certain areas. So there really isn't that typical day, but that's what makes it fun.
And I suppose that you've got to have a degree of being a people person to be comfortable reaching out to and organizing these many, many projects.
Yeah, you definitely do. But one of the things I will say, I think is really important is you can be that gregarious people person, but you've still got to make sure that you've got the organizational and logistic skills underpinning all of that. You know, I mean, I always remember this, like some of the best editors I worked with in terms of games journalism, especially when I was a journalist, you know, they were people who you would probably say would be quite introverted, actually.
Yeah.
You know, it was possibly surprising, but what they had in their favor was they were thoughtful, they were considerate, they had often great planning abilities. And so they were able to sit there and plan these things out and that they would go and put themselves forward for the right conversation at the right moment. So I think it's one of those things to think about where, you know, when you're trying to especially broaden the talent pool, or trying to think about who could do a job well, it's important that you're able to have those great conversations. It's important that you're able to present, but it's also important not to rule people out on the basis of other skills because a comms team, especially, it can be multidisciplinary because of the nature of the discipline, right? It's important to make sure that you factor those in and potentially find those places within a team for those kinds of people because it could be an invaluable way to bring on board some different perspectives.
Yeah, definitely. So what would you say, obviously you mentioned a couple of projects already that Ukie have worked on, specifically like Games for Carers, which was free games for key workers at the beginning of the COVID crisis. What would you say has been the best project you've worked on?
I think it probably is Games for Carers. I mean, it's difficult because we've been really privileged to work on some really great projects so far. So, when we launched our Get Smart About Play campaign, which was about getting family controls used more by parents to do things like limit in-game spend, especially unexpected in-game spend, and limit playtime and age and appropriate content. Like, it's a really important campaign. And when we launched it, Rio Ferdinand was our figurehead for it, because he was a parent who hadn't ever heard of these controls or tools, and then realized actually for his kids it was perfect and he should go and set them up. So, that was really exciting to launch, and it's been great to see that develop. But with Games for Carers, it was the way it organically developed. I remember writing it into our Slack being like, do you think we should do some sort of free games for like key workers, like keys for key workers, or like codes for carers or something like that? And then I went and jumped onto Facebook, and I saw in a games industry Facebook group that a journalist called Chris Scullion was doing that. He already had a spreadsheet and was basically gathering up codes and just emailing members of the people within the NHS and going, I've heard that you're within the NHS, here's a free game for you. And then just completely and genuinely like serendipitous, total chance. I also got added on LinkedIn by one of the team at Keymailer, who I think they were just adding me because, it was James who's their PR lead there. And, as part of my role, I have to speak to the heads of PR and the PR leads at all of the companies that we work with, and they're one of our members. And we just ended up having this half-hour chat on a Friday, and we just said, do you want to have a go at it? Do you think we can do it? And then over the course of sort of 4 or 5 slightly mad weeks, built a website using Keymailer's tools. We worked out the way to get NHS workers only into it, by using NHS official email addresses. Chris spoke to some of his contacts, got some codes on board, so we spoke to our members, and then putting that all together within 4 or 5 weeks and just seeing like tens of thousands of people. I mean, actually on the first day it was hundreds of thousands of people turn up to try and get those free games. It was extraordinary. And it was one of those things where it was really hard and really stressful. And there were definitely some times, especially right at the beginning, where the website was really struggling under the weight of all of it, where I was kind of like, oh my goodness, have we bitten off too much?
Servers on fire.
Exactly. Is this more than we can chew? And then just that same day, we just got an email from someone who was a clinical nurse who was actually stationed at the Nightingale in London. She just sent us an email which basically said, I've got a 6-year-old. When I come home from work, I can't go and hug my child first thing when I get through the door, because I've been working there. I need to go and upstairs, shower, wash, do everything possible to make sure that I'm disinfected, to make sure that I can be around my child. And even then, I'm feeling uncomfortable. I don't want to give them that. I don't want them to get it or transmit it onwards. So I don't feel quite as close, and it's quite a stressful time. And she just said, but him having a free game just makes a world of difference. She was saying he's happier. She was feeling happier because she could see that he had that. And she just said, thank you. And that was it. That's what was worthwhile about this, bringing just a little bit of happiness to people. I think that's what games are great at doing. Often when we talk in the industry about the benefits of games, people will sort of scratch their heads and go, oh, well, they can be educational, or, oh, they can teach you life skills. But actually, the benefit of games is that they're fun. They're enjoyable. They're entertaining. You can lose yourself for just a bit of time in something that actually just brings you a little bit of joy. And something, it may not always be the most cerebral joy. It may not always be the most cultural experience that you're ever going to have. And often, sometimes I'll sit there and I'll be playing Mario Kart and I'm going to be thinking, I love Mario Kart, but this is not Shakespeare. I do understand this. But actually, fun is a key part of life. It's a key part of the way we all have to live. Because if we all live hard, difficult lives all the time, we're never going to get through it. And that's what games bring. They bring that joy. They bring that happiness that anyone can experience. And I think it's important that we make sure we just celebrate that and celebrate games for what they are, rather than trying too hard to try and shove them into being something else, especially when Games for Carers campaign showed to me that people just appreciate the fun.
Yeah, definitely. And it's just on a very base level, it's just a nice form of escapism.
Exactly. And I appreciate as well that the different games, completely different experiences. And one person's escapism in video games is sitting and playing Candy Crush for a little bit. One person's escapism is going and jumping, as I do pretty regularly, into Mario Kart 8. Another person's escapism is driving a truck from Aberdeen to Bordeaux. Some people will be playing games that are delightful and cheery. Some people will be playing games that are absolutely miserable and are tonally depressing, or they'll be playing games that are insanely difficult. I mean, if you try to go into the deeper bits of Hollow Knight, I mean, for goodness sake, honestly, wanting to punch my face sometimes, it's so hard. But the whole point is that there's this whole range out there, and every single one of those games can find an audience, can find people and connect with them. and they can do so in a way that other creative forms can't. You don't get that sense of agency with film or TV. But I think it's really important that we actually just celebrate games for what they are. If we don't, we have a habit of letting other people define us, whereas actually we know what games are. They're great, they're entertaining, they're interactive in a way that no other form or creative industry is. So let's just enjoy that and make sure we're telling the world about it.
I'm definitely on the side of the scale of, dark social narrative. Yes.
There we go. A little bit of being a border guard for an East European fictional Soviet republic. Yes, please. That's what I like to do in my spare time.
Similar but slightly different question to best project you've worked on. So what would you say would be your career highlight, or one of your career highlights?
Oh, good question. I mean, I think so. Early last year, before I took this job, I got to host a BAFTA live stream with Lars Jacobson, who's studio director for Sports Interactive, and a football journalist called Carl Anker. And it's about a passion project that I've always had, which has been basically exploring the crossover between the world of football and football within video games. So we got to basically do Q&A with the two of them and then took a load of questions. I mean, that was extraordinary. Like, if anyone had ever said to me that, when I was younger, not only would games be recognized by BAFTA, that first happened about 20 years ago now, that I would end up doing a Q&A for them with some big gold masks behind me, with a journalist that I really respect, with the person who's basically built the game series that I've spent the most time playing in my life by a country mile. I never would have thought that was going to happen. So I think that's probably well up there as a career highlight.
Yeah, that's a pretty good one.
Not bad.
No, it's not bad at all. So moving on to some more questions aimed towards Ukie as a whole. What are the objectives of Ukie? Again, the outside looking in. You're quite a sort of feel-good resource of empowerment, I suppose, providing tips for the industry on how it can be better, providing resources, helping with diversity. So yeah, what would you say is the base goal of Ukie?
The best thing is our base goal and our mission statement. It's been pretty much the same, I think, since Joe Twist took over back in, oh my goodness me, I'm not going to say which year, just in case, one, I get it wrong, and two, she shouts at me for revealing potentially any form of age thing. But it is to make the UK the best place to make, play, and sell games. So for us, that then translates into some pretty practical and tangible actions. So the first one, in terms of making games and selling games, one of the key things to do is to support the industry and to support the growth of the infrastructure there. A lot of it is by, as you say, providing resources on things like everything ranging from, here are some standard contracts that you can pinch from us and use to help get your business going, to here are sources of finance, let's introduce you to them, to diversity is crucial. Here are resources to get you going in building a diverse and inclusive workplace, and advice upon making the business case to do so that people can feel encouraged to do that. But it's also about doing other things, like in terms of like political engagement. So, speaking on behalf of the industry to politicians and policymakers to explain to them why things like video game tax relief or the UK Games Fund are essential drivers of growth across the UK, building jobs across the country, et cetera, et cetera. So we have a lot that we do in terms of advocating on behalf of the industry, but we also have to do a lot of work in terms of actually explaining and quantifying the sector to those outside of it. People understand that games are a big deal now, which is obviously fantastic, but quick and important questions like, how much is the UK consumer games market worth? How many jobs are in the country? How many businesses are there? Where are they based? We spend a lot of time working with our data team to make sure we have the answer to those questions, because when we do, we're able to go to all of our different audiences and talk to them about how great this industry is and how great that sector is. So you've got that kind of data-driven approach. And then beyond that, there's a number of different things as well that we're doing on behalf of the industry to support it, to make sure that we hit those three goals. So in terms of playing games, one of our key things is about industry responsibility. So, we both encourage within the industry and straight to parents the important practice of promoting safe, sensible and healthy play by using things like family settings, by making sure that people are playing the right age-rated games with the help of advice from the VSC rating board, who manage the process in the UK. It's about fostering those responsible play habits. And we do so through our site, askaboutgames.com, but also by going and talking to groups and charities to spread that message. And then we have other elements too. So our education team, who are trying to build the pipeline as well, running initiatives like Digital Schoolhouse to try and encourage the teaching of computing through play-based learning, all the way up to supporting student initiatives to make sure that we have people coming into the industry who are ready to go. So the way I kind of describe it, to summarize that, is we try and cover the industry's life cycle from that moment that someone first becomes interested in games. Our hope is that we can inspire whoever it is, from whatever background they come from, to take their first steps, to get the right skills to get into the industry, to join it, to get their first job, their first role, to give them the support that they could then go on and either become a key figure at a key business that's operating in our sector and across the UK, or go and create their own. That's kind of like our key objective, is to help people throughout that life cycle and to make sure that we show to the world around that actually people doing that work is both economically productive, but also culturally important too.
You're definitely doing the Lord's work advocating for the games industry to people that are not up on it at all.
Yes, it is challenging. There are certain times where I've had difficult moments, and I think, one of the key things that the industry always needs to be aware of is, people are looking in on us, and, we use a lot of jargon and we use a lot of terms that we all understand, which is great. But actually, if we're not taking the time to explain those terms, if we're not taking the time to explain how our business works, people don't understand what's going on. And when people don't understand what's going on, they can get a bit scared by it. So for us, it's really important that when we're talking to people who don't get games, that we do what we can to explain it, and we make sure we do it in a friendly way too. There's never anything good about trying to explain something that someone doesn't understand in a way that comes across as a little bit sarcastic or comes across as a little bit sort of disdaining. So, one of our big things is we kind of want to guide people by the hand, bring them into the sector, show them what we all see, which is that it's this great, friendly, creative sector that's growing up fast, that's doing so in a really interesting and positive way. We're not perfect. There's still room for improvement, and we want to go and do that. But we want to invite those people in so that they feel like they want to contribute to our mission rather than potentially throw rocks at us.
Yeah, exactly. Here's why you should work with us.
Exactly.
Yeah. So obviously, once the industry got to a certain size in the UK, the sort of need for a trade body such as yourselves is kind of self-evident. But do you know how Ukie was originally founded?
So that was back in 1989, and it was founded as, I think it was actually called at the time, the European Leisure and Software Publishers Association, which became ELSPA. And so that was founded, like you say, because the industry started to realise there was starting to be a critical mass of game publishers in the UK, and that they need to start being represented. So that happened way back in September 1989. I mean, since then, obviously, the industry's changed a lot. I mean, one of the key things for us is that we're actually the oldest industry trade body. In terms of the video games industry, we do have the distinction of being the first one onto the field. So that's a very nice one in terms of the UK. But I mean, obviously, over time, ELSPA changed and naturally enough became Ukie. But a lot of the things that we take for granted today was actually done in conjunction with ELSPA and in conjunction with the trade body. So the age rating system, for example, the first conversations around a proper age rating system in the UK happened in the early 90s. Mortal Kombat was one of the big triggers for that. So ELSPA worked actually with the BBFC, who were doing film ratings, to basically create the first age rating systems, and that's evolved over time, eventually becoming the PEGI system, which was created in conjunction with publishers across the world, but also other trade bodies. And that's one of the other things to really bear in mind too. Ukie exists, and we do this in the UK, but we have partners all around the world. There are different organizations like CEL in France, ESA Canada, ESA in the US, who do exactly the same things. And we're now kind of entering a bit of a global age where we quite regularly speak with those people, maybe sort of once or twice a week. ISFI, who run a kind of a pan-European body, I'm probably talking with them every other day. So one of the great things about us is that we have the chance to tell the UK story internally, but we also have the chance to make sure that the UK's voice is heard across the global industry as well. So it's never been more important reason to have a trade body, I'd say.
No, definitely not. And what do you think? Obviously, at the moment with work from home, although things are starting to be slightly at the moment, the games industry, both nationally and as a whole globally, has seen quite a pickup in the demand for hardware, software, accessories. I think the Switch is sold out and has been for a while. What do you think of the games industry in the UK at the moment? Is there any trends you've seen? Is there anything that concerns you?
It's a really good, really interesting and important question. So yes, there has been an uptick in game sales and game hardware sales. There's no point in denying it. People have wanted to play video games in lockdown because, funnily enough, when you are at home and you are not allowed out of the house, especially in the early stages of lockdown, for more than, say, an hour a day for exercise, you do go, this is a good time to get Animal Crossing. This is a good time to go and visit a paradise island. So, game sales have gone up, and, in the immediate short term, it's obviously been a benefit. But there are some concerns, and I think there's probably a few trends that have emerged that I think are things that the industry needs to be paying attention to, and is kind of shaping the way that we're thinking about advocating on its behalf. So the first is remote work actually works for the industry for the most part. But the problem with remote work is, I think the first one is actually it does reduce productivity a bit. It's not the case that every company is going to be affected equally by this. Some have had no impact, others have had a lot. But, in terms of surveys that we've been doing, I think sort of very preliminary figures that we'll probably go into much more detail further down the line. But it looks, roughly speaking, at around about 80% productivity, which is still good and is much, much better than, unfortunate creative industries like film or TV that have really had a tough time. But what it just means is games are just going to take that a little bit longer to make. Times for development are going to take a bit longer. There's the possibility for delays. So, there is that possibility for disruption down the line. And that disruption, I think, can be compounded by some of the problems that are also emerging as a result of remote work. So getting funding and finance is a bit more difficult in a remote environment. And it's not necessarily because you can't meet up with people. You still can virtually. Games London ran its fantastic games finance market in April as part of the festival. But I think the problem is that often with making investment decisions, it comes down to an interpersonal relationship. So actually having the opportunity to meet someone face to face and talk over issues in person can often be more effective. And then there's also the fact that, people are a bit jittery. They know that the economic circumstances are getting a bit more challenging. So do you want to go and invest too heavily in anything at all? Even though games are doing well, are companies thinking, okay, we might need to be a little bit cautious? So there's that possibility that especially companies who are sort of, in terms of the food chain, maybe a little bit lower down, looking for investment for their next game or for their studio or for whatever it is they're working on, they may be starting to find that it's actually starting to become a bit more difficult to actually get a hold of that. And then that leads into the final problem that, again, I think is going to affect more of those companies further down the line, potentially, is the frank truth that we're entering a recession. Let's look across the country. There are probably going to be quite a lot of job losses. There's going to be probably fairly widespread unemployment as a result of this crisis. People are not going to have as much money in their pockets to spend on other things. Now, games, people have talked about them being recession proof, and there is some truth to that. But actually, I think it may well mean that there's a situation where people choose to make those bigger purchases, like the new console with the big hit new game, rather than spreading their money around. So what we really need to be careful of as an industry is, and I think this is the most important thing, is making sure that we are helping those small, medium businesses out by getting them access to finance, access to the people they need to speak to, so that those companies there who are probably most likely to be hit from both sides by the not able to speak to investors or publishers at events and potentially losing out on game sales, making sure they have the sources of finance and the access to it that they're able to basically get a hold of to keep themselves going. We're doing this in lots of different ways, making introductions, running events, but this is possibly something that we might start asking government about. I think games are actually not very heavily invested into by government. There's a lot of misconceptions around them, especially around video game tax relief. There's a belief we get this huge amount of cash. Compared to film or TV, we don't really at all. So we're thinking that there's a case to be made in probably the coming year for some targeted investment into games. So not a huge amount of money, but adding a bit more money to somewhere like the UK Games Fund to help out those smaller businesses. So that's the kind of situation. Overall, I have to say games have done okay at the moment. Really can't deny that. But we have to think about those mid to long-term problems in terms of the impact of COVID. So it's one of those things where we're certainly in a better position than some. Let's keep the focus on. Let's be careful. Make sure we support the businesses who might be starting to anticipate some problems.
It's mostly about future-proofing, isn't it, for like AA and indie studios, just so they don't get pushed out by financial pipelines.
Yeah, exactly. One of the key things about the UK industry is something like, in terms of our membership, for example, about 80% of the developers who are in our membership actually have fewer than 20 employees. And if you look across the industry as a whole, the vast majority of games businesses in the UK are actually small, medium enterprises. We want to make sure that those plucky developers who are working really hard, who in any normal circumstances would have more than a fighting chance of succeeding, to give them the support they need at this strange and unusual time to keep themselves going.
Exactly. We've kind of covered it just now with speaking about potential further funding into the games industry in the future. But for Ukie specifically, kind of a broad question, but what does the future hold for Ukie?
I think one of the things that I've really appreciated, having been self-employed, having run my own business, Ukie's goal kind of always remains quite stable. We're here to represent the industry. We're here to be the voice of the sector, and we're here to give guidance. Even in the most challenging of times, that never changes. So even though our work often adapts, even though what we're campaigning on will shift or change, we always just have to make sure, we have to ask ourselves those questions. What of those things are going to help us make the UK the best place to make, play and sell games, and to help our members and help the industry at large do so? So I think for us, it's just about thinking about those priorities. So I've talked at length there about making sure that we're securing businesses against any sort of financial or wider repercussions as a result of the COVID crisis. But I think it's also really important that actually diversity is top of the agenda. We did did our diversity census earlier this year, which showed a lot about the industry, especially some areas where we really need to work. And we've seen it with some of the recent accusations that have been coming out on social media and Black Lives Matter. The industry needs to do more on this. And we need to do more on this as a trade body to invite people to diversify their workforces. So our Raise the Game pledge, which any games business can sign up to, we really strongly encourage you to join into that. And we're going to be doing more internally to make sure that we can continue to encourage the diversity of the sector there. And then as well, I think this industry responsibility point is essential. One of the things that I think has been quite common in the history of games is people going, when's the moment that games are going to go mainstream? When are games going to get taken as seriously as film or TV or any other creative sector? The answer is they are being taken as seriously. We are now getting the level of scrutiny that all of those sectors get. And so if we are not being completely responsible in the way we run our businesses, in the way we support our consumers, and in the way that we look after players, we are going to get hammered for it. The environment is changing, but I see that as a really positive thing. I know the games industry in the UK. I know the people who work in it. They are fantastic, thoughtful people who have already risen to a lot of these challenges. But I think the key thing that we want to do is make sure people keep rising to them in the future as well. What is responsible always changes. What is best practice is always going to shift. But as long as we make sure that we're always paying attention to that, then I think that's going to be one of the other big things that we're going to be doing. So we'll be doing all of that as well as everything else we do. We've got Gamescom coming up, digital Gamescom, exciting plans around that, and then lots and lots of other things. We've got our AGM in September, which are all Ukie members, of course, welcome to attend, and then loads and loads of other activities in between. So keep your eye on our Twitter. That's what I say.
I was just about to ask, where is the best place people can find you and keep up to date with Ukie? Would it be Twitter and your website?
Yeah, so that's it. So ukie.org.uk is the best place to find out all kinds of information about Ukie. Twitter, it's www.twitter.com/UK_IE at UK_IE. Someone managed to nab Ukie, I think, many moons ago, and I think we've been brewing that ever since. Yes, exactly. So you can also find us there on Facebook and on LinkedIn. And then I think importantly too, we have a number of newsletters. So if you go to our website and go to the newsletter section, you can get a weekly update, which provides all kinds of information about the industry. And if you're a Ukie full member, so developer or publisher, we have our subgroups as well. I run the communications subgroup. There are subgroups about diversity and all kinds of other topics. If you go and check them out, you may well be able to come and join them too. So lots of different ways to hear from us.
Amazing. Is there anything else you'd like to add or promote at all?
Oh, you can follow me at George Osborn as well if you want to laugh. It's one of the distinct, unique joys of having my name is the random abuse I get from strangers on the internet who think I'm the other George Osborn. So that's literally going to be the only other thing. And also, I just recommend you give TikTok a go. It's quite good fun.
I was going to say, I bet it doesn't help with the George Osborn link with you having sort of tangential links to politics either.
No, that's in fact the reason why I briefly became a quiz show answer on BBC2's Only Connect, in which I was featured in a category of people with mistaken identities on Twitter. You can actually see it as my Twitter header banner image as well. So if you ever want to have a little laugh, I recommend that.
Amazing. Well, thank you for spending some time with me today. It's been great.
It's been an absolute pleasure to come along. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Aardvark Swift podcast. This episode was hosted, edited and produced by me, James Bowers. If you have any questions or suggestions for the podcast, or if you'd like to feature on an upcoming episode, please email james.b@aswift.com. If you're looking to break into video games or make a transition to a new role, be sure to check out the Aardvark Swift website at aswift.com. We have hundreds of industry vacancies at studios both at home and abroad. Be sure to follow us across social media for the latest news and roles. You can find us on Twitter, LinkedIn and Facebook under our handle at Aardvark Swift. We also have a behind-the-scenes Instagram account where you can see what we get up to and what it's like to work here at Life at Aardvark. The music in this episode is from Incompetech by Kevin McLeod. To learn more, you can visit incompetech.com.